It is now noon, and therefore we're starting the webinar. So welcome. I'm Bill Petrovic. I am a SCORE mentor. I work with the workshops and the webinars. We don't do any face-to-face workshops anymore until the venues open back up. The libraries are not letting us use their conference rooms, and that's okay too, because it's a little safer for us to do these webinars. But this morning's webinar is on franchising, and it is sponsored by SCORE. Just a quick mention that if you're interested in mentoring, we do that too. It's free. Sessions are 1 hour. We also do those by Zoom, so very much like what we're doing right here. And you can sign up for mentoring by going to our website, which is indianapolis.score.org. And so our speaker this morning is Jim Gleason. Jim is a former SCORE mentor. I've known Jim for as long as I've been working at SCORE, and that's about 7 years. I think in terms of people around town who know the franchising business, you can't find anybody more knowledgeable than Jim. He's been working in this area for a long time. When I first met him, I was also teaching at the IU School of Business in Bloomington, and he was kind enough to come down and spend an hour with the class down there. Probably not the same slides we're going to have today, but it was a good presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate that. So I'm going to let Jim get started. He's controlling the slides. I'm watching the questions and answers, and if you don't realize it, your microphones are all muted and your video is off. So sit back and relax. And Jim, let's go.
Okay, thanks, Bill. I appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate SCORE hosting this today. SCORE is a great organization, and as Bill said, I was there for a number of years and was doing mentoring as well, and really helping a lot of people determine kind of businesses they might want to get into and how to best operate those businesses. So today we're going to be talking about franchising, and is it a strategy that fits you? Because most people understand franchising when they drive down the streets. They see McDonald's, they see Subway, and they see all those various food franchises, and that's what they think about franchising. But as we're going to talk today, it's much more than that. So a little bit about FranBiz Consultants. That's my company. We just, even though I've been in the franchise business for going on 14 years. I just started this new company in January, FranBiz Consultants, and I have an associate. We're working together, and our focus is on helping individuals get into new franchise placements. In other words, if somebody wants to get into a franchise for the first time and wants to do it from a startup of a franchise, we can help them do that and figure out how to do that. We're experts on franchising. My colleague and I, between the two of us, have over 20 years experience in the franchise industry. And we help individuals find franchises that are a match. And we'll talk more about that, but that's a very critical issue, obviously. Finding a business is going to be a good match for an individual's skills, abilities, goals, and those kind of things. And we currently work with more than 400 franchisors, excuse me. In franchise industry, we talk about being in business for yourself, but not by yourself, because it's your business. But at the same time, you have the support and the aid of the franchisor that has more experience in the industry than typically most people when they enter the industry for the first time. So a little bit about me. I've been in the corporate world, counseling world, consulting world for more than 30 years. Actually, I could probably change that. It's a little longer than that. I'm a certified business coach. What I did when I was a business coach, I worked with existing businesses and worked with their owners in order to deal with different things that might be in the way of the growth of the business or helping them achieve their goals. And I'm going to make a comment here that I think it's important for people that are looking to become business owners. It's important to understand is that quite often the owner of the business, particularly a small business, becomes the obstacle to the growth of the business. And I'll talk more about that as we get further into franchising. I'm a certified franchise consultant. That has to do with the number of years and my knowledge. And I'm also a certified Main Street business broker. What that means is I've also been a business broker helping people to buy and sell existing privately held businesses. They could be franchises, they could be just an individual business. And that comes into play as we talk more about the different ways to get into business here. So it's interesting when we think about people getting into business in the U.S. here. About 70% of all people have thought seriously about owning their own business. It's kind of like the American dream. Gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could own my own business and that I could have control and all those various things? And it's a great dream, and a lot of people achieve that. And so what we want to do is help you to understand whether that dream is right for you or not, because certainly not everybody should be a business owner. Not everybody should own a franchise, but we can help figure out if that's going to make sense. So the common reasons why people look at business ownership, one of the big ones is financial freedom. Rather than me working for somebody else and making money for them, why don't I work for myself and make money for myself and for my family? And that way I have more control as well. Building an asset for the future. This might be one of those things where you're building the business so you can pass it on to your children or grandchildren, or something that you might be able to sell in the future to help you toward retirement. Freedom and control of your time. I've been in business for myself since around 1994. And one of the things that has become very big to me, especially early on when my daughters were still little girls, now they're both in their 30s, but when they were in school, because I had freedom in the control of my time, I was able to go spend time with them in the classroom, talk to their teachers, go to their baseball games, or softball games, or soccer games, and really spend time with them during the day. Now, what I had to do then is at night make that time up, but because I had control of my time, I was able to do that. Following your dream, like I said earlier, it's quite often people think of the American dream as owning a business, and that's a great dream to have, and one of those things that people kind of want so often put on their bucket list. Interesting with this one, remove of a threat of job loss. When I first got into the franchise industry, it was back in about 2007, and there was a lot of downsizing going on because of the economic times, and we're certainly facing that with the COVID issue. But people looked at saying, okay, I'm going to go into business for myself so I don't have to worry about whether I have a job or not. In fact, when I went into business for myself, I had just in about the last 2 years before that been downsized twice. And I finally said, enough is enough. I'm not going to allow somebody to determine whether I'm going to work and make an income or not. So that's why I went into business for myself. It's also a way to replace a lost income stream. Just think about this. If you got a job right now, and let's say, and there are franchises you can do on a part-time, semi-absentee basis. Let's say you started a business like that, and then something happened to your job. You're not going to be starting from scratch with no income. You've got a business that's already bringing income for you. So that's another reason people get into a business for themselves. So look at it, and why do you want to get in business for yourself? Because the why is a big issue, and I think it's something that you really need to look closely at. So there's three primary ways to get into business. One is sort of starting up your own business. One is buying a business. As I mentioned, I was a business broker and I help people do that. And buying a franchise. As a franchise consultant, I help people do that. So let's look at the pros and cons of each one of those. So the first one, let's look at starting a business for yourself. The pros, the reasons people do want to start a business for themselves, they have total control. They make all the decisions. They determine what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it. It's their business to do with as they please. And as I say, as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical, you do what you want to do. You keep all the profits. You're not sharing it with anybody else unless, of course, you have a business partner, but the profits are yours to keep. And so because of that, it has the biggest upside potential. On the other hand, some of the cons, some of the reasons, negatives, you must create your own systems. Now, I mentioned that I was a business coach and working with business owners. One of the things I often saw was that the small business owner, quite often the significant operation of the business and how the business existed was contained in that owner's head. And so the owner became the key to whether the business was going to grow or not. And an individual can only get so far on growing a business. And so quite often that's why the owner became the cap to growing the business because they didn't have systems where other people could come in and do things for them. The next one, no one to turn to for help. That's not entirely true because I'm sitting here with SCORE, Bill Petrovic, SCORE mentor right there, and there's a great organization to go to for help. So I really need to change that to say there's limited options for help. Because SCORE is a great organization, and when I was a mentor, I had a lot of business owners come to us, and we were able to help them with whatever issues there were. Certainly, there are limited financing options. One of the things that banks look at if they want to, if they're going to finance a business, is this individual able to service the loan on a monthly basis? Can that business produce the income to service that loan? Well, if you're doing a startup business and there's no income, that becomes an issue. Now, if you have the financial wherewithal to have some money aside for working capital and things such as that, then you might be able to get some financing because you've got other income. Or maybe you have a spouse that's got a regular income and there's enough of that to help service that loan. But certainly the financing options are more limited. It could be years before you make money. I've seen people that have started a business and they didn't make any money for 1, 2, 3, some of them 4 years or more. But I've also seen some that got into business for themselves and they were making money within that first year. So, they were very fortunate because that doesn't happen a whole lot, but they were able to do that. Starting your own business does have the highest failure rate. And the reason behind that is that when you're starting your own business, there's a lot of experimentation that goes on, trying to figure out what's going to work and what doesn't work. And those things can be pretty costly if you spend a lot of money on things that don't work, and all of a sudden you figure out it doesn't work, and you spent $20, $30, $40,000. So that's one of the big things that you have to look at when you're going to start a business for yourself. Am I going to be able to sustain that long enough, and am I going to be able to kind of quote unquote experiment, if you will, to find what works and what doesn't? So buying a business, the reasons people buy business, because an existing business has cash flow and goodwill. You can look at the actual historical results. Typically, when a person is looking at buying an existing business, they're going to look at their P&L and balance sheet, which are internally created documents, but they're also going to look at the last 3 years' tax returns, which are documents that they filed with the IRS. So when a bank is looking at potentially financing a business purchase, which is the next one attractive to lenders, they're going to want the last 3 years' tax returns. So you've got some historical results that you can see where the business has been and how well the business is done. Now, the issue of the goodwill, that often has to do with the owner and the reputation of that business within the industry, with their customer base, with competition, those kind of things. Again, it's attractive to lenders because quite often there is income coming in that can service that loan. And that's, let me tell you, folks, the number one thing banks are looking for is the ability to service that loan, because they don't want to make loans that are going to fail. Typically, you're going to have an established location and customer base, and that's going to be a critical thing. The customers are obviously what's bringing in the income, and so you have that customer base. It's not something that you've got to go out and find from scratch. Quite often there will be employees in place. And this is a great one because in today's world, and when I was doing business coaching, I've always told people your number one asset is your number one liability. Your greatest asset is your number one liability, and that's your employees. And so if you have these employees in place, that's very attractive to you as a buyer, especially when you've got employees that have been stable for a period of time. Systems may be in place. So you may have an owner that's taken the time to develop systems so that other people can function in that business and be able to run that company. In fact, one of the things when I was a business broker, people come in and say, "Hey, Jim, how can I create more value with my business?" One of the things I would tell them is the less valuable you can make yourself to your business, the more valuable that business is to the next person that's going to look at buying your business, because they don't have to depend on you to make sure that the business is going to operate after they buy it. And one of the things that quite often happens with buying a business is owner financing. In other words, the owner is going to carry a certain part of the note. Let's say, for example, the business is selling for $100,000, just to use easy numbers. The owner might carry a note. The buyer might want the owner to carry a note for, say, $30,000, and that would be paid off after 2, 3, 4 years. So the owner is going to finance that business. Banks like that because that means that owner's got a financial a motive for you, the new buyer, to be successful in that business. And it also for the buyer, that's a good thing too, because for the same reason that the owner wants to make sure that that buyer is successful in the business. Some of the downsides of buying a business: what is the real cash flow? And this is real interesting in today's world. Now, there's some industries that are noted for having some kind of questionable whether the cash flow, what the real cash flow is, because they do a lot of business with cash, actual cash, rather than checks or credit cards, those kind of things. But in today's world with COVID, I just talked about banks wanting the last 3 years tax returns. And as a buyer, that's what you'd want. So you're looking at tax returns from 2017, 2018, and 2019, and all of a sudden we hit 2020. So do those 3 years actually represent what the ongoing cash flow is going to look like through COVID and post-COVID? So that's one of the issues that I know some of my broker friends are dealing with, is when they're selling a business. How do I value that business based upon what's happened with COVID, and how will that business do post-COVID? What is the goodwill? And is that goodwill contained primarily with that owner? So again, that's one of those issues. Hidden seller motives. Now this comes into play is if there's some new legislation or something going on in the industry that maybe the seller's selling the business because they know there's some new legislation that's going to happen. There could be other hidden motives too. Poor training and support by the former owner. When a person buys an existing business, one of the things they're going to negotiate is a transition period where the seller is going to stay involved in the business for a period of time, just like I mentioned earlier with the owner financing, so that they transfer the necessary knowledge to the new owner so they can operate the business. And certainly limited liability. In today's world with the COVID, there's a lot of businesses that people are wanting to sell, but finding businesses that are good, strong, and profitable business becomes a little bit more of an issue. So now let's talk about franchises. Some of the positives about franchising. There are a lot of choices out there. There's over 4,000 franchises. There's a slide that's coming up that's going to talk about 4,000 franchises in 80 different industries. So there are a lot of choices. Next one is a big one. Projections are based on other franchisee results. So with an existing business, you're going to look at that business and what that business is producing. So you got one business to look at. With a franchise, you're going to be able to look at the people that are currently in business as franchisees and see how they're doing. And you have access to that whole network of franchisees, and you can talk to any of them or all of them and find out how they're doing. So you've got multiple businesses you can look at to see what you can expect to be able to do as a franchise owner. It has proven systems in place. That's what franchising is about. That has systems in place. Remember, I talked about maybe a privately held business that might have systems in place. Well, franchises do have systems in place, and that's why they're successful, is because they have these systems in place. So when you come in, you don't have to figure out what kind of marketing system or what kind of operation system. All these things are in place for you, and the franchisor can help and lead you through on how to do that. It's certainly not a first-time effort, because the franchisor was in business typically for them in that business before they ever franchised it. So they've got experience in that industry, and there's no correlation between income and investment. I'll talk more about this a little bit later, but the amount of money you invest and buy a franchise or invest in a franchise, there's no correlation between the kind of income you can make about that. And again, I'll talk about that in a couple minutes here. Some of the negatives about franchising. There are a lot of choices. So how do you, as a potential franchisee, find the right business for you? And we can help you do that. And again, that's something that's here in a few slides, but there are a lot of choices. So do I look at a food franchise? Do I look at a home service franchise? Do I look at an automotive franchise? Do I look at a home health? All these different opportunities out there. This next one's kind of like, no kidding, not all franchises get good results. And I will tell you this, that there's some negative connotations about franchising, I think, in the general public, because of some things that some franchises have done. And I will say this, anything negative you have heard about about franchises is probably true. It's just not true about all franchises. So you can't take a negative and broad brush it across the whole franchise industry. So there will be some ramp up time when you're starting a brand new business, just like when you're starting a business from scratch. There's going to be some ramp up time. So you're not going to be able to pull income from that business for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you've got to be prepared for that. You're going to need to be able to support your family, support your current expenses, and also have the capital, the working capital, which is enough money to stay in business long enough to become profitable. and franchises have royalties. Typically, the royalties are a certain percentage based upon top line revenues paid on a monthly basis. On average, the royalties range from about 4 to 12%, but I've seen them as low as like $350 a month, and I've seen them as high as 25%. But what you've got to do when you're looking at the franchises is find out, what do I get for those royalties? The one I just gave you with the 25%, that particular franchise, they do have accounts payable as one of the things they need to work on. So what the franchisor does is they actually do the accounts payable and the collections for the franchisee. So what they've got is a variable cost getting those collections, as opposed to a fixed cost of hiring somebody to do that for them. So again, understanding what you're getting for those royalties is very important. So let's look at franchising, and what is it? Franchising is a way to mitigate risk of going in and operating a business. And what we do at FranBiz Consultants, we kind of look at this as a building block, if you will, because most people think they understand franchising, but they really don't. We want to provide education to provide a foundation, and that's what we're doing today, is providing that foundation. So we want to give people this foundation to understand what franchising is, what it isn't, and if it makes any sense for you. So now I've got this foundation. You look at that foundation and say, okay, gosh, I think I might be interested in franchising. So the next question is, how do I find a business, a franchise that's going to be a good fit for me? And there's a process that we work with our candidates on to help them find that business. It involves a survey that's been benchmarked against successful franchisees in a number of different industries. We have our candidates take that, and then we can make those comparisons. We also spend time getting to understand and know what our franchisees' goals are, what their lifestyle is, what's important to them with their family, and all those various things. So we take a lot of this, we take this information, we gather it, and an understanding what our candidates want to achieve, and that from that we can help start narrowing down that list of franchises. So you've got this foundation that you've said, okay, franchising is something I'm interested in. Now I found a couple, 3 franchises that are going to be a potential fit for me. So what's my next step? My next step is doing due diligence. In other words, looking at the franchise businesses and finding out how well they perform, what kind of income can I expect, what's the profitability, what's the break even, and all those various things, the cash flow after 2 years or whatever it is. So you're gathering all this information, and you're gathering this from the franchisor and also from the franchisees. And when you start gathering information from the franchisees, the term we use for that is a validation. So you're gathering information from people that are in business today doing what you do should you buy that business tomorrow. So you're making a fact-based decision. You want to take the approach for this whole process that this is an educational, fact-based kind of journey, if you will, rather than making it a buying aspect. Look at it as this education. I'm going to educate myself on franchising. I'm going to educate myself on some specific franchises to see if they make any sense for me. So I have this foundation that I built. I now have a couple, 3 franchises that are a good fit for me. I've gone through my due diligence. I've got it narrowed down to 1 franchise. So then I decide that I want to invest in that franchise. So now when I get into that franchise, I now have proven systems to understand what works and what doesn't work. Remember when I talked about the experimentation that a business owner does from a startup, and there's a lot of money that they use in order to try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. Well, because of the proven systems within the franchise, you don't have to do that experimentation. The franchisor has figured that out for you. So franchising is a system-based business strategy. And if you get nothing else out of this webinar today, understand franchising is all about systems. That's what makes them work. That's what makes them successful. They have systems designed to penetrate the marketplace. What social media do I use? Do I use newspaper or radio, which are outdated in most industries, but there's still some industries that use those, and they use it very successfully. So I'm penetrating the marketplace, but it also provides me an efficient distribution system so I can get that product or service out into the marketplace in an efficient manner, probably better than most privately held or individually held companies. There's certainly a growth opportunity as a franchisee. The stakeholders, you as a franchisee, the franchisor, there's that growth opportunity for your customers or your clients, for the vendors. So there's all these opportunities for growth for all the various stakeholders that are involved in the business. The franchise is mutually beneficial to franchisees and franchisors. And this is a part that a lot of people don't think about. There's kind of a division of labor, if you will, between the franchisee and the franchisor. One of the franchisors basic jobs is to look at what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on with competition, what's going on in technology, and in today's world, what's going on with COVID, and take that big picture approach so they can figure out what they need to do to make changes to their franchise system so the franchisees can continue to be successful. What the franchisee role in all this is to penetrate the local marketplace, keeping the franchisor aware of what they're seeing out there so that the franchisor can help them make those adjustments. As an example, I was having dinner with an owner of a franchise system several years ago, was a sign franchise. And this was at the point where there was some new digital equipment coming out for digital equipment for signs. And so he went to several of the digital sign equipment vendors, determined which one he thought was best for his franchisees. And at that point in time, I think he had 250 or 300 franchisees and put anywhere from 10 to 15 new ones in per year. So he negotiated with that vendor, because when he's got that power of 10 to 15 new placements every year, and then current franchisees upgrading, he had more negotiating power than an individual franchisee might have in order to go in and buy that new equipment. So he was keeping up on the technology, helping to get a good price for that, and helping them determine what would be the best way to go with that. So it is a strategic partnership. The franchisee and the franchisor are working together to make this business work. So in elements of the franchise, the top left over there, that brand, the franchisor is going to do a whole lot of things and put a lot of contingencies in place to protect that brand, because the brand is everything. Without that, we really don't have anything. And so there's these operating and support systems that the franchisee is going to use in order to make this puzzle fit together and make this successful for the franchisor and the franchisee and for their clients and customers. So let's talk about the value of systems, because as I said, systems is really what a franchise is all about. The systems help reduce risk. And how does it do that? Well, one of the ways is by the operating systems the franchisor has in place. They have software, they have accounting systems, they have all these various things, how to keep track of your inventory, different things like that, that help you as a franchisee be successful and not have to do all that experimentation that I mentioned again earlier with startup businesses. Next thing is their support and collaboration. In most franchises, they have what's called a franchise advisory council or committee, and that's a group of the franchisees. They communicate with each other, they talk about what's going on, what they're learning, what they're seeing, and then they start helping each other figure out, hey, I need to do this. This has worked for me. What about what's worked for you? And in doing this also, they're keeping the franchisor involved in that, so they know what they may need to make changes on. And also sometimes franchisors get some ideas that they think things that might work, and the franchisees are going, hey, wait a minute, we're out here on a day-to-day basis. That doesn't sound like such a good idea. And we've got this committee of franchisees that's saying, wait a minute, we need to take a look at that. So there's that support and collaboration, again, within the systematic operation of a franchise. So again, value of systems, continuous improvement and training. Remember, we talked about what do I get for my royalties? Well, one of the things is that, again, the franchisor looking in the marketplace, they're going to look at how they can improve and how they can make the franchises better, how they can make them more effective in training. If you're old enough, you may be able to remember when McDonald's didn't do breakfast. I can remember that. They didn't have breakfast. And then at a certain point, they thought, hey, we got these buildings sitting here. We've got grills there. Why shouldn't we put some eggs on there and some pancakes and start serving breakfast? And so they saw a way to expand a revenue base within that system. So that's just an example of how a system provides continuous improvement in training. And certainly with the COVID issue that we're dealing with, there's a franchise that I'm aware of in a commercial cleaning area. They were able to find a certain type of spray that is very effective and very what do I want to say, allergenic or whatever, it's hypoallergenic, so that they could use it in commercial office buildings and keep the issue of COVID in control. And that's one of the things they brought to their franchisees. And from what I've been able to talk to the owner, that's been a very successful new service for them. Sales and marketing. How do I get my product or service out there? Do I use newspapers? Do I use whatever? SEO, social media? And there's all these various ways. And social media, can be a very inexpensive way, but depending on how you're using it, it can become pretty expensive. And so the franchisor knows what type of social media to use, when to use it, how to use it, and how to effectively get out there and get it and find that customer. So it helps to lower that as a customer acquisition cost. The value of systems, again, guides and manuals. Most of these are electronic, not paper like it's shown here, but they have like, for instance, a franchise that is a brick and mortar. That franchisor probably has a manual that describes what you need to do with that space and how to do it, how to design the space and all those kind of things. So you don't have to figure that all out. And they're probably going to be involved with you in doing that. Back when I was a business coach, one of my first business clients said, "Hey, Jim, can you send me an invoice?" And I thought, invoice? I hadn't thought about that. So I had to run home and get on the computer and pull up a couple sample invoices and create an invoice. Well, with a franchise, you don't have to be doing those kind of things. Also, purchasing power. If you've got a product or service that's disposable or it gets used up, food would be one of those things. It could be some chemicals. It depends on the business you're in that you might be using, and for automotive or for pest control or different things like that. They provide purchasing power to help with keeping the cost down. I've talked to a number of franchisees over the years that they were buying the product from the franchisor, and they went out to see if they could get a better product, because quite often the franchisor will make money on those purchases from the franchisee. And what they found is they could not buy the product any cheaper than they were getting it from the franchisor. And a lot of times the franchisor was getting it to them with less expense. So the value, again, purchase power. And I mentioned with the guy with the sign company, he had that purchasing power because of multiple units. So let's talk about some franchise statistics. Franchises account for about 50% of US retail sales. There's about 759,000 businesses providing about 8.2 million jobs in the US, impacting the economy at about $757 billion to the US economy, which is around about 3% of the GDP. So you can see franchises have a significant impact on the United States economy, and it's a major employer out there. So it's one of those things that it hits the economy, it hits individuals, helps individuals provide for their families. And I've talked to business owners and franchisees that providing jobs for their employees has become very important to them, because they get that sense of that they're having a really impact on these employees and their families, because without them, they might not have a job to support their families. Franchises are sustainable businesses. Around 86% of franchises open in the last 5 years are still under the same ownership. So the person that bought it 5 years ago is still operating it. 97% are still open. So what that means is 11% of the franchises that were bought 5 years ago, they're still operating, but they're under a different ownership. So it was bought or sold during that period of time, during that 5 years. Less than about 5% of franchises close each year, whereas 62% of non-franchise businesses or startups close within 6 years. So you can see that franchises are pretty sustainable, and they'll be around for a long time. So let's talk about the fees with franchising. There's going to be a franchise fee, and if you've had any been around the franchise industry at all, you've probably heard that term, franchise fee. What the franchise fee is, that's typically what you're going to have to invest when you sign that, when you decide to invest in a franchise, when you sign that franchise agreement, and then you pay the franchise fee. That's going to secure your territory and start the process of getting the business up and operating. But there's going to be other costs, initial costs besides the franchise fee. There could be for a build out for a brick and mortar. There could be some additional training costs. There could be some additional equipment costs, whatever. Those are all the all-in costs. And that's what you as an individual, when you're initially looking at a franchise, that's what you're really interested in, because the franchise fee is included in that all-in cost. So you have the franchise fee and any other cost. So that's going to give you what the all-in cost, that's the term we use, the all-in cost to get the business doors open, if you will. There are also ongoing fees, as we mentioned, royalties, again, on average 4 to 12%. I won't go back through that with a lot of detail, but the thing to understand about royalties, good franchises make their profits on the royalties. They make very little, if any, money on those upfront fees on the initial franchise fee or other costs, because they're paying their people, marketing costs, advertising costs, customer acquisition, and all those other costs are eaten up in those fees. So franchises primarily become profitable through their royalties. So keep in mind and think about this. So that means the franchisor has a financial investment in you as the franchisee, because the more successful you are financially as a franchisee, the more successful that franchisor is going to be. So it's one of those things that we got to work this together to be, so we can both be successful. There could be marketing and advertising fees. Sometimes it's 0.5%, sometimes it's 1%, and technology fee as well. So you've got potentially 3 ongoing fees: royalties, marketing and advertising fees, and technology fees. Some companies don't have marketing, advertising, or technology fees, but that is all disclosed in the franchise disclosure document, which I'll be talking about here in a second. So again, as you're going through and looking at the evaluating the franchise, it's a system of discovery. You're going to take this step by step through qualifying the franchise. And one of the things I'm going to mention here is the franchisor wants to know you, the potential new franchisee, how well are you going to follow systems? And the only way they can determine how well you're going to follow a system is how well you're following the system they are now taking you through in order to do the due diligence and investigation and research of their franchise. So they may have a survey they want you to fill out. They may have a website they want you to get on. They may have some videos they want you to watch. So they're going to see how well you're following the process that they're putting you through right now, which will help them determine how well they think you're going to follow the process that they're going to have should you become a franchisee. So keep that in mind if you choose to go through this process. It's an open and honest exchange of information. The franchisor is going to provide, again, this franchise disclosure document that's going to provide all kinds of different information. And you're going to have a phone call with the franchisor. Initially, it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 phone calls with the franchisor. You're going to review that franchise disclosure document. You're going to be able to ask any questions that you want. And then at a certain point, you're going to start talking to franchisees, and you're going to be asking them a bunch of questions. But it's also, you're going to be providing information to the franchisor, because they want to see if you're the kind of person that's going to fit within their system, within their culture. Every franchise has a culture. And so they want to see if you're going to be a cultural fit. So the way you do this, again, we talked about due diligence. You're going to do this through this due diligence, and the franchisor is doing due diligence as well. As a candidate for a franchise, you have open access to the complete franchisee network. So kind of how this works is you get introduced to the franchisor. Again, you're going to have a few phone calls with them, review the franchise disclosure document, and then you're going to start talking to franchisees. And you can talk to any of the franchisees that you want to. Every single franchisee that was in existence at the time of the franchise disclosure document, I keep referring to that, and it's in a slide coming, you have access to them. Franchising is a controlled business by the Federal Trade Commission. And one of the rules of the Federal Trade Commission is the franchise cannot restrict who you talk to within the franchise system. So when you're doing this, what we call validation, talking to franchisees, you're going to want to talk to franchisees that are in demographics similar to where you're going to have your business. So let's say you're going to open a business in Fishers, Indiana. Well, you could talk to somebody in downtown Chicago or downtown New York City, but demographically, those are 2 very different areas. And so you might not get a lot of really good, valid information. Whereas if you're talking to somebody in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, or Kansas City, Kansas, or Nashville, Tennessee, that's going to be a more reasonable match demographically to Fishers, Indiana. So you're going to want to talk to franchisees in similar areas. You're going to also want to talk to franchisees that have been in business for different lengths of time, because a small business is very much like a child. It has an infancy stage, a toddler stage, an adolescent stage, and an adult stage, and it changes throughout those stages. It grows differently. So talking to franchisees in different parts of the development stages gives you an idea of what you're going to have to do and how you're going to have to change as an owner. You're also obviously going to want to talk to successful franchisees and find out what's made them successful, and determine if, are you willing to do what they've done to be successful? Are you willing to follow those systems? I would suggest you also want to talk to franchisees that aren't doing so well. And why would you want to talk to them? Well, find out why not doing so well. I had a case about a year ago where somebody called up a franchisee, And originally it was the husband and the family that was operating the franchise, and the person got a hold of his wife, and she said, yeah, he was doing very well when we started the franchise. He was following the systems, and we were doing very well. And he decided he thought he could figure out how to do it better than the systems. And when he started doing that, we started going downhill. So that's why I'm here now, working to get us back on track. What did that potential franchisee learn? That potential franchisee learned that the systems work, so follow the systems. So what your goal is to make an informed decision, a fact-based, overall, very good informed decision. Here we go with the franchise disclosure document. So again, it's the exchange of information on a fair and equitable basis. The franchise disclosure document is a document that's anywhere from maybe 100 to maybe up to 200 pages long. The document is written in pretty much understandable English, except for the franchise agreement, which is within that document, and the franchise agreement is written in legalese. But the rest of the document is written in, so you can understand that. And when you get that franchise disclosure document, you're going to want to read through it. And when you read through it, you're going to say, oh my goodness, this is written dramatically in favor of the franchisor, and it is intentionally. Because the franchisor, remember we talked about brand earlier in that puzzle picture? The franchisor puts all kinds of contingencies in place to protect that brand in case they got a franchisee that's doing something that they shouldn't do. They've gone off and decided to do their own thing. So they have contingencies in place to protect the brand for the franchisors and for other franchisees. So what that means is, if you get far enough in this process and you get their franchise disclosure document and you're getting close to thinking about investing in the franchise, you're going to want to have a franchise attorney review that franchise disclosure document and the franchise agreement. And I emphasize franchise attorney because if you have a business attorney that's really never reviewed any of these documents, they're going to tell you not to do it because it is written dramatically in favor of the franchisor. But if you have a franchise attorney who's probably written some of these documents, some franchise disclosure documents, and reviewed several hundreds maybe over the years, they're going to be able to tell you what the regular standard language is and where there are red flags. And they'll be able to help you determine that. One of the things that sometimes a franchise attorney can do is also help with negotiations. Now, I will tell you this, that if you decide to start looking at franchises, enter this thinking you're not going to be able to negotiate anything, because depending on the franchise, it may be take it or leave it as it is. There are some franchises, sometimes you can negotiate some things, and that's where that attorney can help also. But you need to enter this thinking that you're not going to be able to negotiate anything because a lot of franchises you're not going to be able to. And certainly the older and more established the franchise is, the more likely that is to be. So this no decision for 14 days, you have to have that franchise disclosure in your hand for 14 days before you can do anything in terms of purchasing a franchise, signing an agreement, or spending any money. And let me tell you this, if you're making that decision within 14 days, you're moving way too quickly. There are 23 items in the franchise disclosure document, and I'm not going to go through all those, but item 23 is a signature page where you sign and date it and you send it back to the franchisor. You're not making any commitment. All that does is show the franchisor that you have received that document. It's an acknowledgement from you of receiving that document and the day you received it. So when it gets down to looking at moving forward, potentially investing in the franchise, they have that documented that you have had it for more than 14 days. The cooling off period, in the franchise disclosure document, there is the franchise agreement, but there's nothing filled in, it's all blanks. When you get to the point of moving forward, they're going to fill in that franchise agreement with your name and all the various blanks going to be filled in. And so there's a cooling off period for 7 days to give you time to really think through, is this something I want to do? And it's this not just an emotional decision. Within that franchise disclosure document, there's all kinds of information. You're going to find out about the background of the owner, litigation that's been involved, if there's been any. You're going to find out, you're going to get audited financial statements. You're going to get all kinds of different information. And there's one item in there called item 19. That is if the franchisor makes what's called an item 19 earnings claims or financial performance information. This is not required by the Federal Trade Commission, but more and more franchises, and most of them are doing it now. So it shows what a potential franchisee could earn, but the way it shows that, it's typically the top third of the franchisees that have been in business for say 2 to 5 years are doing this amount of revenue. Those in the middle third are doing this amount of revenue. Those in the bottom third are doing this amount of revenue. So it's not an individual. It gives you an idea of what various segments of the franchise are doing in terms of how well they perform. Some franchises do not make that Item 19 disclosure claim, and that has to do with how conservative their attorneys are. But anyway, so when you're going through and you're doing that validation with the franchisees, that's when you're going to be talking to them about, hey, you know, how long did it take you to break even? I need to make $150,000 in 2 years. Is that doable? So you start gathering that kind of information from the franchisee, so then you can make a determination if the franchise is going to be able to meet your needs financially. So let's talk about franchising, some of the truths and misperceptions. And these are, some of them are pretty interesting, but I think some we've already talked about. The first misperception, it's only fast food and retail. Well, I already talked about this early on. There's over 4,000 franchises in 80 different industries. They're in automotive, they're in home health care, they're in medical, just all kinds of different things, home services, and certainly food is what we all think about, but it's in a broad range of industries. Number two, franchises are dependent upon the quality of the product or service. So when I was doing seminars and had I was with people, I'd ask them, who can make a hamburger? And virtually everybody would raise their hand. And then I'd say, who can make or ask who can make a hamburger better than a McDonald's hamburger? And for the most part, almost everybody would raise their hand. So I would say, so what you want to do is you want to find property across the street from your local McDonald's, put in a hamburger joint, you're going to put them out of business, right? And nobody ever said right. They all said there's no way. And the reason being is, the truth is, franchises are all about, what have I said over and over again? Systems. It's about the brand. It's about the operation, the sales, marketing, advertising, accounting. Franchises have to have a decent product or service, but it doesn't have to be the top of the line. That's why McDonald's, which is an okay hamburger, is not a top of the line hamburger, but they do pretty well. So just keep that in mind, that it's the systems that make this work. Third misperception, you need to know what the hot new franchise is in the emergency industry, so there's little to no competition. Inevitably, when I'm talking to people and I'm in a group of people, somebody almost always asks, what's the hot new franchise? And my response is, I don't know. Some of you might be able to remember TCBY, the country's best yogurt. It had about a 10-year run. It was the hot new franchise several years ago. And if you got in at the right time and got out at the right time, you could make a lot of money, but a lot of people lost a lot of money. And there was, more recently, there's like Orange Leaf and Menchie's and other franchises, yogurt franchises. So it's really not about what the hot new franchise is, because franchises don't emerge in non-established industries. Typically, a franchise will emerge in a long-standing competitive industry, and it's their systematic approach that makes them successful. McDonald's emerged when there was a hamburger joint on almost every corner of every little town in the United States. They did not invent the hamburger, but they figured out a way to make that hamburger profitable by the systems they have. And if you saw the movie called Founder, it was on Netflix, and I think it may be back on. It's about Ray Kroc and how he founded McDonald's. There's a scene in there where they're on a basketball court and they've drawn out how they're going to lay out the store and figure out how to get the French fries from the back to the front, milkshakes from the back to the front, the hamburgers back to the front in the shortest period of time. And it's a pretty interesting movie. It doesn't paint a very good picture of Ray Kroc, though. Consumer products, hair franchises, Great Clips, Sport Clips. They didn't invent haircuts, the clip joints. They didn't invent the haircuts. The first one I've ever read about was in the Bible with Samson and Delilah. But haircuts have been around forever. They figured out how to come into the industry and become a successful company in the haircut industry. More recently, business services like information technology, commercial cleaning, just all different kinds of things. But typically, franchises emerge in well-established existing industries and using that systematic approach to be able to penetrate and be successful in the marketplace. Fourth misperception, franchises cost a lot of money. And you can see from this that it's a broad range. Anywhere from under $50,000 for about 13% of the franchises to over $500,000 for 18%, which are the ones that typically we're most familiar with, the ones from about $250 on up, because those are the restaurants typically. Some of them you get in for a little less than that. But for the most part, I mean, there are franchises you can probably get in for around $10,000. But with the franchises we work with, typically they're going to be $50,000, $60,000 on up, and in the range of probably kind of the sweet spot, 80 to 150, 250,000. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at franchises. Talked about this earlier. To make a lot of money, you have to spend a lot of money. That's not true in the franchises because there's no correlation between the investment and potential return because of service franchises. Service franchises quite often can be home-based or operate from a small office in an industrial park that doesn't cost a lot of money, but they're very effective at penetrating their local market and being very effective in getting their fair share of the marketplace. So they can be very, very profitable without a huge investment. So keep that in mind when you're looking at franchises. Sixth misperception is franchisors want you to have industry experience. Well, the reality is only about 25% of franchisees have had previous industry experience. And sitting there, what do you think industry experience might be a negative? Well, it might be a negative because you think you might be able to do it better than the franchisor. And if you believe that, fine, go out there and take the money that you would have spent buying the franchise. Don't spend the money on a franchise that you're not going to use the systems that you buy. And I don't know how many times I've said this over the last 13 years or so. Don't buy something you're not going to use. And inevitably, I've had candidates that have bought the franchise and then they didn't do what the franchise told them to do. They thought they could do it better, or they didn't want to do what they learned they were going to have to do. And what happens more often than not is they're out of business in a short period of time. The reason franchises work, and this is getting old, I know, but it's because of the systems, and that's what you're purchasing. So now there are occasionally some franchises that do look for industry experience, but for the most part, they don't. In fact, they would prefer you not have industry experience. So you come in with a clean slate and that you're not thinking that, hey, I don't think they should do it this way, or I don't think they should do it this way rather than that way. So when you go into business, there's risk. And when there's risk, there's fear. And you need to understand that if you decide to head into the business, franchising or otherwise, you're going to have some fears that you're going to have to face. And what happens, my experience is when I have somebody that I'm working with and they look at a franchise they're not interested in, there's really no emotional reaction. But once they find a franchise they start getting interested in and they start getting excited about, they start getting some butterflies and they start getting some anxiety. And the more interested they get, the more that anxiety increases. Those butterflies kind of get organized and they start flying together and kind of getting in your stomach and getting all those fluttery feelings. That's normal. If you go through this process and you start feeling fear, understand that's normal. It's not something that's different for you. If you're working with a consultant, whether it's our company or somebody else, talk to your consultant about that because it's normal and you can work through it in most cases. Because again, there's risk. Another thing that happens that increases fear is that people that you know will say, what are you doing? With this COVID, you've got to be crazy thinking about going into business for yourself. And what I've discovered more often than not, when people say that, they are truly concerned for your well-being. Or the other part of that, I've also seen people say that because they are jealous of what you're doing and they just wish they would have the guts, so to speak, to do that. The thing to understand is the naysayers are advising you on very little or no information about the franchises you're looking at. Where you've been looking at these franchises, you've been gathering information, you've been gathering facts, you've been gathering information to understand how this franchise works and how it doesn't work, how it's going to fit for you. And they're advising you based upon strictly emotion. Strictly emotion. So understand that. And when that happens, thank them, and you can share a little bit with them, but try not to let that get you distracted from where you're going. When you go through this process and you find a franchise you're interested in, there's going to have to be trust that starts developing. If you're going to go ahead and move forward and become a franchisee with a particular franchisor, you're going to be involved with that franchise based upon the franchise agreement anywhere from 5, 7, 10 years or more. I know some agreements are 20 years. And there's got to be a level of trust. And as you have that level of trust and you feel more confident in that franchisor as you're going through this process, and you start talking to franchisees and you feel get that sense of, gosh, these things do work, that's going to lower your fear threshold. So just understand as you're going through this, that's one of those things that's going to happen. So sometimes you just have to push past it. And one of my favorite stories about this is it's probably, gosh, somebody that I worked with probably about 10 years ago, something like that. She called me up and she said, Jim, I've got the franchise agreement and the check sitting on my kitchen table. All I got to do is sign them. And I said, wow, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And she says, but I can't do it. And I said, what? What's going on? Why can't you do it? She said, I have never written a check this big and I'm pretty nervous about it. And I said, well, you know for 100% sure that you're going to be successful at this? And she said, what are you, crazy? There's no 100% guarantees. And I said, you're exactly right. There are no 100% guarantees. So let's go back and look what you've learned. Let's talk about what you learned from the franchisor. So we spent some time talking about those calls she had with the franchisor and what she learned from the franchisor. And then we started talking about the call she had with the franchisee. As she started reviewing the facts and the information she gathered, the fear started getting less and less, because she was very emotional getting ready to sign that check, and she had kind of forgotten all that information, all those facts that she had gathered. So what we did is we helped to get her to the point where she could see that it made sense, and she went forward with it. So it's one of the things to keep in mind. So what you want to do is you want to look at this as a fact-based, not emotionally based decision. Look at this not as a buyer. Look at this as an educational approach. Certainly, there's going to be emotions, emotions involved, as we just discussed. But gathering facts will help you to understand if this is going to make sense for yourself or not. Education's a great thing. Learning about franchise is a great thing. One of the things I've done this, and I'd love to do this with folks, is help them through this process get rid of what I call a what if. I'm an older guy, and there's things I go, I wonder what if I had. I wonder what if I had done this or I hadn't done that. Well, if we can work with you and help you understand what franchising is, what it isn't, and help you determine that a franchise is not for you, hey, we've taken a what if out of your life, and that's great. I'm happy for you because we've helped you make an important decision. Or on the other hand, if you go through this process and you decide to buy a franchise, we've taken a what if out of your life. And that's what it's all about. Is that's why I'm in this business. I love small business. I've seen some folks that I've helped get into business be very, very successful, and that's really exciting to see them grow and to see how that impacts their family. And I've also seen people that I've seen, later after they decided not to do something, and they're happy too, because we've been able to help them make a decision. And when you're looking at getting into business for yourself, that's got to be probably one of the top 5 decisions it's going to have in your life because of the impact it has on you and your family. It's very much like, where am I going to go to school? What am I going to major in? Or who am I going to marry? It's a very major decision. And what you're going to find out is that if you go into business, you're going to be talking about it at dinner. You're going to be talking about it at vacations. In fact, if you don't intentionally take time away from the business, you're going to be talking about it all the time. So that's one of the things that if you do this, that you're going to have to understand is that we need to take time away from the business as well. But approach this not from a buyer perspective, but from an education perspective. Sorry. So how do I finance this dream? We saw that franchises run anywhere from, like I said, 10 grand on up. So if you have the cash, great, you can finance it. That's wonderful. Friends and relatives. And if you're going to use friends or relatives to do this, you need to have them involved somewhat through the process so they can understand where their money's going and why. One of the areas in this arena that we've seen in the past few years is kids coming out of college, young people coming out of college that either can't find jobs in their chosen field or they find out it's not really what they wanted. I've had parents actually help them get into business. Certainly banks and SBA. Now remember way back when we talked about starting a business and the limited financing options, There's limited financing options starting a franchise as well, but there are a lot of banks that are willing to finance because they can see what the history of the other franchises is, and they kind of get a sense of when and how it's going to cash flow, and they'll be able to to service that loan. More often than not, it's going to have what's involved an SBA loan. And what SBA, Small Business Administration, typically didn't lend money until directly until some COVID things. But more often than not, what's going to happen is if you approach a bank and go to them for financing, they're going to determine whether they're going to finance it or not. And more often than not, they're going to want to finance it through the SBA, Small Business Administration. And what the SBA does is they will guarantee the bank somewhere around 70 to 75% or so of that loan, so that if the individual defaults, the bank is only on the hook for 25 or 30%. That doesn't mean that the individual that defaults in that loan is out of it because the SBA covers it for the bank, because the SBA is going to come to get their money back as well as the bank. And you need to understand that. But that's probably how it's going to be financed. Certainly if you have equity in your home equity line of credit, and I've had people do that they've been able to start and operate a business. In an area that most people are not familiar with, you can use 401k or retirement funds with no tax penalties to start and operate a business. There are certain ways to set that up. And one of the things you have to realize, if you do go that way, you are putting those retirement funds at risk. But on the other end of that, as you start paying that loan back to your 401k or retirement funds, you're paying yourself back. You're putting money back into yourself rather than to somebody else's business. So we can talk to you and help you get in contact with organizations, companies that do that. So operating options with franchises. Most franchises are looking for people to be owners to run the business. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind when you're operating a franchise is separating the function of the owner of the franchise from the function of the business. And another story. I had a lady that came up to me after a networking event several years ago that owned a bagel franchise. And she said, I wish I would have met you 2 years ago. And I said, why is that? And she said, because I was on vacation. I saw this franchise serving bagels, pastries, and boy, I loved him. And I thought, man, I want to do that business. So I came back to my hometown, got online, and really didn't know what I was doing. And I bought the franchise. And yeah, I serve bagels and pastries, but I also have to deal with employees. I have to deal with vendors. I have to deal with leases and all these other things. And I just don't like doing that. And so she didn't have the opportunity to understand that the owner often does things that are not the function of the business per se, that are the function of the owner. And sometimes you'll hear people to say, take your passion and find a way to make your passion a business. And that's kind of an interesting advice. I love cycling, and I at one time looked at a bicycle shop and found out that if I was own a bicycle shop, I'd be in the bicycle shop more than they'd be out on the road riding. So sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. But what I suggest to you as looking at a business owner, become passionate about owning and operating and growing a business. Does it really matter what the business is? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But having that owner and being successful and seeing that success before your eyes and the impact it's having on you, your employees, and your family. Many franchises I mentioned earlier with a division or having an alternative income stream, is many franchises do offer semi-absentee options where you'll operate the business 10 to 20 hours per week, so you can keep your current job. You can diversify your income, so if something does happen to your job, you still have income coming in, and it provides a hedge against economic downturn, excuse me, and you're creating an asset for your future, something that you can pass on to your kids or you can sell or whatever. So there's semi-absentee options as well. So FranBiz consultants, we are franchise brokers. So how can we help, and why would you consider working with us? Well, we can save you obviously a lot of time and money because we know the franchise industry. We know about franchises. We can help you, direct you in that process. We can provide security and knowledge that you normally wouldn't have, provide the education. We can be that matchmaker. Again, the process we would take you through is have you do an online assessment, sit down with you, review that, get to understand who you are, what's important to you, what goals you have, what kind of lifestyle you want to lead, what's important to your family, and on and on and on, things that you don't want to do, things that I had one guy that was a salesperson for 30 years and he was very successful. And he said, Jim, I don't want to be in sales anymore. So we found him a franchise where he didn't have to get involved in sales. But we can help go that matchmaking process. We can help and direct you in investigating the franchise, give you questions to ask the franchisor or questions to ask franchisee. In fact, we stick with you through the whole process, typically on a every week to at the most probably a 10-day basis, but we want to make sure that things are going as you need them to go, and if there's anything that's happened that we need to help you with, we can network with you to get you franchise attorneys, accountants, bankers, and all those things. We can act as a buffer if necessary between you and the franchisor. On occasion, it hasn't happened very often, but on occasion I had to get a franchisor to back off a little bit because they were pressing a little bit hard on a couple of my candidates back years ago. And we provide exchange of information. Our services are free to you. We get paid a finder's fee by the franchises should somebody buy a franchise. And what happens is people say, okay, so who are you loyal to? And what we do is we look at what's the best business for you and what's the best decision for your family. If that means don't buy a franchise, take that what if, like I mentioned earlier, and don't buy a franchise, that's great. We're happy with that because that's the best thing for you and that's how we operate. So what questions might there be, Bill?
Actually, here's one from me. And if anybody does have a question at this point, shoot it, put it in the chat window and we can answer it. But I will say, pretty thorough presentation. I don't think you'll have too many holes there. 4 questions, but I was wondering if it's possible to buy a franchise without a broker. Is it a do-it-yourself thing?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. A lot of people do that. In fact, that example I gave with the lady with the bagel shop, that's what she did. That was obviously didn't turn out very well, but I've known people, a lot of people actually buy franchises without a broker. In fact, when people find out that we exist, more often than not, is they say, I didn't even know there was such a business as yours. And so probably I would think statistically, probably more people buy franchises without a broker than they do with a broker, just because of the numbers of people that buy franchises.
But if they use a broker, does the seller change the deal at all with the person who's buying it?
Great question, and I should have covered that. What happens is if you work with a broker, the fees to you from the franchisor are exactly the same as if you go directly to them. The Federal Trade Commission, again, the organization that regulates franchising, they state that the franchisor cannot raise their fees if you use a broker or if you go directly to them. Your fees are exactly the same, dollar for dollar, no increase in cost. Thanks for asking that. I should have covered that.
All right, that's good. Someone asked about putting up your own money if you're going to get a loan, and that's really a generic question because it's true that no matter what you're borrowing money from for with a bank, if it's business related, they want you to have some skin in the game.
Yep.
So there's nothing unique about borrowing for franchising other than the fact that the banks might be happy to know that they can get the financial history on the franchise you're buying and they understand the brand reputation. Yep. But it's you can't get into any business with no money down, no money out of your own pocket.
Right. And another thing about lenders is some lenders have more of an appetite for certain businesses than others. So if you are looking at, you go to a lender, maybe you've got a banker that you work with and they say no, or they turn you down, don't let that be your last step. Look to other bankers because I know there are some that, for instance, that will fund startup franchises and some that really shy away from them. So just because you get turned down by one banker doesn't mean that the road is closed.
Right. And there's a question here that I think was early on in the presentation, but is well worth repeating. What would you enumerate as additional costs besides a franchise fee that you're more than likely to encounter?
Sure. If it's a brick and mortar, one of the costs that you're going to get into is the build out. And depending on how intricate or how elaborate the franchise is, that could get into that. In fact, the build out is probably, I'm not going to say probably, more often than not, it's going to be much more than the franchise fee. There could be equipment costs that are not part of the franchise fee. For example, if you're getting a franchise that has home service and the franchise fee is $45,000, but you're going to have vehicles to go to a person's home to fix their windows or spray the mosquitoes or whatever else. So you're going to have to invest in vehicles and equipment to do the spraying. So there's additional cost. And those costs are outlined in the franchise disclosure document. So that all-in cost will be outlined for you, and you'll be able to see the breakdown from franchise fee, equipment, and all of the various way the costs are. But there are going to be a number of other costs in most cases beyond the franchise fee. Franchise fees, gosh, they vary from 20,000, even lower than that, depending on the franchise, up to 40, 50,000, 60,000, sometimes more than that. But typical franchise fee that I've seen lately are probably 35, 45,000.
Okay, and then there's a question, is it typical that you form an LLC and then buy the franchise or not?
That's a great question. Yeah, you can answer that. That's answered two ways. Yes, you can do that, and a lot of people will do that, and they'll do that with their quite often. Remember I recommend highly to have the franchise disclosure document, an agreement reviewed by the franchise attorney. They can help you set that up as well as an accountant, and quite often you can do that ahead of time. But what happens a lot of times is that doesn't happen, and so you go ahead and you invest in the franchise, set up the LLC, and then the franchisor will just transfer the agreement to the LLC in most cases. But that's a question that you'd want to ask the franchisor how they like to have that set up. But I've seen it done both ways, where after the franchise was invested in, the agreement was all transferred over to the LLC.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. Put the shoe on the other foot. You've got a business and you think it's franchisable.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go down that path?
Okay. And I have had that conversation with a lot of people over the years. If that's something that you want to do, please, and I'll go to the next slide with my contact information. Please contact me. I'll be glad to talk to you about it if it makes any sense, and I can get you in contact with resources to do that. I've got a couple of good franchise attorneys here in Indianapolis that they do a lot of that, and there are companies that actually do that. So it is a good question. And when I have people have those questions, I will sit down and talk to them and ask them a few questions to see if it makes any sense. But yeah, there's certainly ways to do that, and there is some expense involved, and there's some alternatives to doing it as a franchise initially that are a little less expensive. So yeah, you want to talk about it, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email.
Okay, and here's an interesting question. You've seen a lot of franchises come, and you've seen them grow, and you've seen them go. What do you notice is happening when people want to exit their personal franchise that is working well? They're the owner, but they want to now cash out.
Just like a privately held business, you can sell it. And what you would do is you would look in your franchise agreement to see if there's any stipulations of how that has to happen. A lot of times there will be things in there that say what the transfer fee would be to the new owner, what processes you have to go through. Some franchisors are very involved in that process, but a lot of them will just tell you, get a business broker and work with that business broker on the valuation, and work with the business broker, just like it is with a privately held business. So as a business broker, I actually helped people get into a number of franchise resales. So there is a secondary market, just like with any other business. And the more profitable it is, the more appealing it's going to be.
Okay, good. Those are all the questions.
Okay.
And I'm watching the clock here, and I think we're well within the promised hour and a half range. So I would thank you, Jim, for this. Everything you need to know about franchising. We've had a good crowd watching us here today. Good questions, and as mentioned in the beginning, two things: SCORE and coming to SCORE for mentoring if you're interested. visit us at indianapolis.score.org. And also, this presentation will be repeated or available to watch on our YouTube station, our YouTube channel, which you can find if you go to YouTube and type in their search engine, Indianapolis Score. You can see all the webinars that we've put on in the last 8 months when we started doing webinars. And also, all the people who registered for this will receive a link to this particular webinar so they can find it, and you should expect to see that in about 3 or 4 days. So, Jim, thanks a lot.
Bill, can I just say real quick, one other thing?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. If you do have any questions that didn't get answered, please feel free to call me or email me. That email is my personal email. As I said, we're getting our website done with the new business, and I'll have a business email, but you can reach me at that phone number or email if you have other questions about it. And certainly, again, having been a SCORE mentor, that's a great organization, and they can really help you with making decisions or help give you direction. So again, thanks a lot, Bill. I appreciate it.
Okay, so I'm ending the webinar, and appreciate everybody attending this morning. And thanks a lot, Jim.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Bye.